Hello everybody, my name is Ryan Dial-Stanley and I'm a member of the Lumbee tribe in North Carolina. I appreciate you taking the time to learn about North Carolina's indigenous people. Obviously this is not how I usually do my performances, but I want to thank everybody for staying safe during these times, and I'm going to do the best I can to accommodate everybody and still give you the opportunity to immerse yourself in the cultures of North Carolina's first people. Alright everybody, now I'm going to take you through step by step how I get ready for a powwow or performance in an Eastern Woodland regalia. When I get ready, I always start from bottom to top. First I start with my leggings. These are worn by Eastern Woodland dancers and I've worn by Eastern Woodland people for many years, and what they simply do is just cover my legs. They're made out of different materials like linens and different cloths that were available in the 17 to 1800s from European traders. You'll notice now that it doesn't seem to cover a whole lot, but don't worry, by the end I'll be fully dressed from head to toe. Next I put on my moccasins. There are actually many different types of moccasins depending on the tribes in North America. These are worn specifically by native people in the Eastern Woodlands, so that's all the way up the East Coast from here in Florida and all the way up into Canada. And these moccasins are specifically made for the type of terrain we find here. In the Eastern Woodlands, there's a lot of thick forest area, so that's why, if you notice, these don't have a hard sole like a lot of the shoes we wear today. These uses the same piece of leather that wraps around our foot, which allows us to be quiet while we're hunting. They also have these flaps that can tie up around your ankles so to have good ankle support while we're running. I like to take a moment to point out that I use insoles in my moccasins, and I say that because I want everybody to know that even though this is a traditional regalia and many parts of it have been worn by my people for hundreds of years, there's a lot of modern elements incorporated in it to make it easier on the dancer or the person wearing it, such as the insoles. I also use different types of belts and different shoelaces and things that I just bought at Walmart like anybody else. Next, what I have here are garters, and these are modeled after European garters that were used to hold their pants legs up, and they say they serve the same purpose, but now we use them more as accessories. So if you notice, this is actually hand woven from yarn, and people incorporate different designs. So though it does serve a practical function, it's still very much so an accessory that matches the rest of my regalia. Next, what I have here also go around my leg right below my knee, and these are made out of deer toes. But I only typically wear these when I'm dancing because they make noise that matches the beat that my feet are going. So I know that I'm on beat with the drum while I dance. Because I'm not dancing today, I'm going to leave them off for now. Next, I have an apron that has a front and back panel that goes around my waist. If you'll notice, it's also decorated with silver. At the time, a lot of native people would trade with Europeans like Spanish, French, and British for different items that we didn't have, such as silver, cloth, and other type of metals in exchange for animal furs, animal parts, and leather. Now I'm about to put on my long shirt. If you'll notice, this is actually a more modern type of fabric. It's just a basic calico cotton with different patterns. I actually have multiple shirts that I interchange if it's a multiple day powwow. You'll notice throughout this whole segment that a lot of the things I wear are purely just for accessories. And a long time ago, both men and women would typically accessorize with different pieces of jewelry or different clothing, and we still have that tradition today. Next, I have a bandolier bag that goes over my shoulder. This is another piece of my regalia that serves a practical function like holding my phone and wallet and keys while I'm dancing, but also as a decorative item that goes back hundreds of years for multiple different tribes. This is a finger woven belt, much like my garters, that goes around my waist. These types of belts are mainly worn by Iroquois dancers. The Iroquois is actually a linguistic group that spans across multiple different tribes all up and down the East Coast, from North Carolina and all the way up into Canada. Now that I've got the main pieces on my regalia, I get to move on to the accessories. Like I said before, both men and women accessorize their regalia in multiple different ways. Here in front of me is just a few of the different types of accessories I have, from necklaces to bracelets and earrings. So a lot of powwows span multiple days, so this way I have a variety and wear something new every day. So I think for today, I'm gonna stick with a lot of wampum. So a wampum necklace, wampum earrings, and a wampum bracelet. Now to finish off, I have a Kostova. This is a type of Iroquois style headdress that is still worn today, and it actually differs depending on the Iroquois tribe. This one is specifically worn by Tuscarora people, and since my tribe has Tuscarora ancestry, a lot of members of Lumbee tribe wear one. But the Kostova is different when you go up north to different tribes like the Seneca and Onondaga. You can actually tell what tribe they're from based on how their Kostova is. This one's made out of turkey and hawk feathers because that's what we have in North Carolina. So it's got turkey tail feathers, wing feathers, and various types of hawk feathers. Now I'm fully dressed in an Eastern Woodland regalia and ready to go do another performance or dance at a powwow. The reason I keep saying this is Eastern Woodland regalia is because regalias differ depending on the tribe. There are some regalias that are specific to the Plains people in the North and South Dakota. There's also regalias that are specific to the Navajo people or the Dene in New Mexico and Arizona. And here in the East Coast, we have regalias specifically for the tribes here. I also like to point out that I'm always calling it a regalia and never a costume. And that's because when we wear costumes, we wear them when we're dressing up and pretending to be something. When I wear this, I'm not pretending to be American Indian. I'm wearing the same thing that my ancestors have worn for hundreds of years. So I do not refer to it as a costume, and neither should you. We always refer to them as regalias. So North Carolina indigenous people have multiple types of art forms that range from visual and performing art. Types of visual art includes contemporary and traditional forms like painting, beadwork, and other traditional arts like pottery and jewelry making. There are also many types of performing arts that includes music, singing, dancing, and one of my favorites, storytelling. Storytelling for Native people is used for multiple different reasons, not just entertainment. Some stories are used to teach about the world around us and explains how things came the way they are, and a lot of stories are complex because they teach about a tribe's history. So again, storytelling is not just a form of entertainment. For my people, it is a form of education, and it was the first education done on this land. This is the story of how the Native American flute came to be. I mentioned before that a lot of storytelling is used to explain the world around us and how many things came to be. So this story is how we Native people got the American Indian flute. And it starts off with one of my favorite animals, the woodpecker. So long ago, before the humans, or sometimes referred to as two-legged, came to the earth, there were just the animals that we have today. One of which was the woodpecker. And something different about the woodpecker, he's the only bird that can't sing. And I'm sure most of you who live in North Carolina know, North Carolina is home to many birds that sing very well. But not woodpecker. We can always hear a woodpecker, but he's not singing. He's actually up in his tree working. So every day, woodpecker would get up in the morning and he would have to listen to all the different birds sing their songs. He heard birds like robin, blue jays, cardinals, all with these beautiful songs. But woodpecker couldn't make one for himself. And it's not because he didn't try. Woodpecker used to try all the time to sing. He would go up to a river so he could look at himself just like we do in a mirror, and he would mimic what the other birds do. So he would plant his feet, puff out his chest, put his shoulders back, and he'd take a deep breath. And nothing would come out. So he'd try again, try different positions, trying to get some kind of song to come out. but every time he got the same result. And after many failed attempts, eventually Woodpecker gave up. Well, the next day, he was up in his tree again, working. He loved working with his wood materials, and he would make many different things that he would trade the animals with. He made different pieces of art. He would make spoons and different practical things the animals could use, and he was the best at it. But the one thing he wanted to do was learn how to sing. And eventually this made him really sad, to the point where he prayed to the Creator and said all he wants to do is be able to make a song. It doesn't have to be the best or the loudest, but he wants to sing like all the other birds. And many days went by and nothing happened. And then one day, his prayers got answered, except he didn't know it just yet. He was up in his tree working like he usually does, and out of nowhere, a branch broke off. We went down to look at it, and it was a nice branch, and he said, I'm going to take this back, and I'm going to make something with it that the other animals will like. So he took it back to his house, and he got to work. He started taking the bark off, and he hollowed it out. He didn't quite know what it was going to be yet, but he knew he wanted to make something nice. Well, he fell asleep at his desk, like many artists do, and he had a dream that night. And in his dream, he saw seven fishes going down a river, 7 birds in the sky, and 7 creatures running through the forest. And he didn't know what this meant until he woke up, and in that piece of wood he had, there were 7 holes drilled in, and he can't remember how they got there. Well, he said that's fine, he could still make something nice with it. And he wrapped leather around it, he finished carving it, and then he put his signature in it. Except it wasn't his name, he put a beak in the front of it, so all the animals would know that it was Woodpecker who made it. Well, he walked around in the forest, and he'd walk like this, tucked up under his wing. Well, he tried to sell it to all the different animals, or see if he could trade something for it, but nobody wanted it because nobody knew what it was. It wasn't something they could use, like a gardening tool or a spoon. A lot of animals already had so many of his pieces that they couldn't afford another one. But he kept it with them, hoping to get rid of it from somebody. And he took it up to his tree, where he always works, just like this, tucked up under his wing, and he had it to where the first 6 holes were covered, but the last one remained open. And while he was up there in his tree, a gust of wind blew by, and that wind went straight through one end of the flute and out the other, and because he had those 6 holes covered, it sounded like this. And after that, all the other animals stopped in the forest, and they wanted to know who made that new song. It didn't sound like any of the other birds who usually sing. And they asked everybody. They asked Robin, Blue Jay, did you write a new song? And all of them said the same thing. No, that wasn't me. Well, eventually Woodpecker came down, and everybody had saw the new instrument in his hand. And after they heard the song that could be played with it, everybody wanted a flute. So what Woodpecker would do is he would take all the branches that had fell from the trees, and he would make them into flutes. One thing that was different about flutes versus the instruments that were already there, like drums and rattles, is each flute was different, and it had a different song. Some were big, some were long, some were short, some had lower tones, some had higher tones, and that way there was a flute for every type of animal to have their own song. And eventually, when it was time for the two-legged to come, they would find these flutes and play them in their villages. And traditionally, it was mostly men who played the American Indian flute because they used it as a courting instrument. So American Indian men would go, find a flute, and play it for a woman they'd hope to marry him. However, what's different in American Indian societies versus a lot of European societies is the woman did not have to say yes no matter how good the flute song was. She could say no, and if a man wanted to try again with another woman, he would have to destroy the original flute and go make a brand new one, because only one flute could be played for one woman. My next story is a story about Eastern woodland drum. Now, many people recognize this as a drum, but a lot of people don't know is this style of drum is actually mostly played in the plains area with the Lakota, Dakota, and Nakota people. The drum I'm going to tell a story about is a water drum, used specifically by the tribes like the Iroquois and Algonquin in the eastern woodlands. And this is a story that takes place long ago when a lot of the tribes here were fighting with each other. The Algonquin, the Siouan, and the Iroquois were constantly at war with each other. And one day, the women in the tribe, or the clan mothers, had decided that they had enough. And they were going to find some reason to get the warriors to stop fighting with each other. So what the women of the different tribes did is they went to a medicine man and they asked him how can they get their men to stop fighting with each other. And he told them to go into the forest and take note of all the animals there. In the forest, even though different animals hunt each other and there's different predator and prey, they're never at war with one another. There's always a mutual respect between all the different animals. So the women had a mission to figure out how the animals keep peace with one another. And after a while of observing them, she noticed something that nobody else had noticed before. When the animals were not hunting, they had times of peace and had ceremonies. And during these ceremonies, they would sing songs and dance with one another and do dances where all the other animals could participate. And in their dances, they used a drum. But it was a drum that had never been heard before. So the women noticed this, got to work, and made a drum exactly like the one they saw the animals use. And it looked something like this. It was just part of a tree trunk with a piece of deer skin on top. So the women got to work and made it, and then they tried it out and see if they could write a song with it. But they had one problem. Their drum didn't sound like the ones that the animals played. And they couldn't figure out why. So they went back to the same medicine man, showed them their drum, and said, "We made a drum just like the animals have. Why isn't it working?" And he took it, he inspected their work, and he said, "It's not alive." And they didn't know what he meant by this. And he said, "There's one thing that all living things have in common that helped them stay alive." So the women went back and they tried to think, what's one thing that the plants, animals, birds, fish all have in common is they all require water to stay alive. And just like them, this drum needed water to stay alive. So after the women filled the drum with water and they made sure the hide was wet, it sounded completely different. So the women used this drum to write songs and play them for the different communities. And this helped the different men and different tribes get together and have ceremonies and songs they can sing together. And that's why to this day, a lot of the songs that we sing during our ceremonies don't include words in a specific language. They include sounds that all people can learn as to not leave anybody out. And that's why this drum is known as a water drum, and it's also known as a peacekeeping drum. And it's still used today in ceremonies that take place across the state and across the East Coast. So what I have in front of me are various examples of indigenous crops and herbs and other plants. One thing particular about North Carolina indigenous people is we were majorly an agricultural society. That means that most of our diet comes from the things that we grow, like beans, corn, squash, potatoes, tomatoes, and many other of the foods that you probably eat on a regular basis came from indigenous farmers. Some examples of that is corn. Corn was actually first domesticated in what is now Mexico and then made its way to the rest of North America. Now, one thing you'll notice about this corn is that it's probably different than what you're used to eating. That's because nowadays, with a lot of our crops that we eat on a regular basis, they're usually one species of that crop, whereas native people would grow multiple species of the crop. So that's why the corn you see here comes in different colors, like this rainbow corn, red, and even blue. There's a lot of dishes you can make with corn besides just cooking it and eating it off the cob. My people were actually the first people to make cornbread, which is what's eaten in many places here in North Carolina. They would grind the corn in a mill, mix it with water, and then fry it in animal fat. They also made what is now called hominy, which is when you dry the corn like this, and you could store this for a long time and then reheat it later. And the kernels would actually puff up once it's cooked in an alkaline solution. And now, again, that is called hominy and is still eaten by a lot of different cultures here in North America. Other plants that were grown in North Carolina traditionally were also ones that were not used to be eaten. This includes different types of herbs, one of which, tobacco, was first domesticated in eastern North America and had a variety of purposes. Before Europeans started smoking tobacco, it was actually used as a medicinal crop and could be made into different medicines that could treat things like inflammation and is a natural antiseptic to use on wounds and keeps them clean. Tobacco was also used in ceremonies and it was burnt when prayers were said. Other types of herbs include sage, which comes from the mountain areas in North Carolina and west of that. Sage is also used during ceremonies and has been popularized now for smudging, but was originally used by American Indian people. Other types of herbs include cedar, which actually comes from a tree, the bark of which can be used to make boxes, such as this one. And they're typically used to store feathers because bugs don't like the bark from a cedar tree. And even today, lots of chests are still made from cedar to keep bugs out of things like wool. The leaves from the cedar tree can also be burned for smudging and used in ceremonies. Next is sweetgrass, which is actually not indigenous to North Carolina, but is still used by North Carolina people in ceremonies. Now I'd like to show you different examples of indigenous wildlife found here in North Carolina. Some very common wildlife that a lot of people have probably seen if they've lived here are turtles. North Carolina is home to a variety of species of turtles found all over the state, particularly because North Carolina is also home to an extensive river system, especially in the eastern part. Turtles play a very significant role in American Indian culture and are included in a lot of the storytelling that we do. So a couple different examples of turtles you'll find here in North Carolina is a yellow-bellied slider and an eastern box turtle. Now, many of you might see these guys trying to cross the road, and word of advice, if you can do so safely, please help them get across, because an interesting thing about turtles is a lot of times when they're moving, they're not moving aimlessly. They have a particular destination in mind. So if you put them back on the side of the road they were already on, they're going to keep trying to cross the road as much as they can. So the best thing to do, if it's safe, is just to go ahead and help them get across the road. And please, when you see a turtle, do not pick it up and keep it as a pet. They do not make very well domesticated pets. And again, when turtles are out, they usually have a destination to go to, and they know exactly which region is their home. So when you take them out of their home, they get very anxious and don't do well in captivity. Another mammal found here in North Carolina is the gray fox. So there's a couple different types of foxes in North Carolina. This is one. This fox would have been hunted a long time ago. Because North Carolina natives were mainly an agricultural society, hunting was kind of supplemental to their diet. So there wasn't really one type of animal they would eat. Some of the more common meat sources would have been wild turkeys or deer, but individual families would hunt any kind of animals like foxes, raccoons, or beavers, and we would still use their skins for a variety of reasons. Other types of wildlife common in North Carolina are ones that a lot of people gloss over, and that is shellfish. So because North Carolina not only has an extensive river system, but is also on the coast, we have lots of varieties of fish and shellfish that native people would commonly eat. So some types of shellfish are an Atlantic coast scallop. So this again is a saltwater shellfish. Is found off the Atlantic coast. As you can see, it's very big, and if you notice right here, you could see where the meat is. So a lot of these could feed a whole family if need be. And because they're thick shells, they're pretty heat resistant, so they're also used as bowls for burning herbs during ceremonies. Another type of shellfish is the wampum shell, and these actually come from quahog clam shells. And these are more common in the northeastern part of the country, in New England and Maine, but you can actually still find wampum shells in North Carolina off the coast. They're just not as common. I've also got some smaller types of shellfish here. These are oyster shells and mussel shells. So oysters are, found in salt water, and they provided food for a lot of my ancestors, particularly the Algonquin people who lived on the far coast and what is now the Outer Banks. But these mussel shells are actually freshwater mussels, and they're found in rivers. I actually personally picked these up when I was kayaking down a river in Sampson County where the Coharie tribe is, and they had been ate probably by an otter who had a pile of these shells laying around. And what my people do, and people still do, is they collect these shells, and they can be used as accessories and for many different art items, but they can also be made in different types of tools, one of which would be a scalpel that would be used for tattooing. This next shell here is actually interesting. This is an abalone shell, and what's interesting about it is it's not indigenous to the East Coast. This is actually found on the West Coast, but I wanted to show it to you guys today because abalone is still widely used here on the East Coast. And I say that because I want everybody to know that a lot of tribes traditionally would trade with each other and still do. So you can still find wampum as far west as California, and you can find abalone that's from the West Coast here in North Carolina, and it's used to decorate a lot of our regalias. So I mentioned that there's many different types of indigenous art, particularly performing arts, some of which include dancing and singing, but another type of performing art is flute music. The American Indian flute is actually one of the oldest instruments found in North America, and there are multiple different versions depending on the tribe that plays them. And some of the oldest versions of flutes have been found in South America and in North America and are thousands of years old. So real quick, I'd like to demonstrate some American Indian flute music. Thank you, everybody. Like I said before, this isn't typically how I do a lot of my shows and performances, but I appreciate everybody staying safe and taking the time out of your day to learn about North Carolina's indigenous people. Nyahweh, and thank you.